All right, so what should we talk about today? Say there's Kabbalah, right?
Kabbalah.
So you have a channel called Seekers of Unity.
That's correct.
Delves into lots of philosophy, and definitely incorporates tons of Kabbalah.
Certainly.
We learned in similar system,
Yes, we did.
right? Very similar system. A bit of overlapping, so we've kind of learned the same Kabbalah, Chassidus. So I wanted to talk about that, different things which probably, our mentors didn't necessarily touch upon
Sure.
over time. Maybe I'll start with mentioning a few of them
Sure.
that I found very interesting, which I think most people don't notice, and that is that that the spiritual realms in Hishtalshelus, which I've recently started calling the cosmic evolution of spiritual realms.
Cool.
Atzilus, Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya. I think most people see them as, worlds out there.
Certainly.
And I've noticed or understood that they're not. They're here.
Yeah.
There are sources, obviously, for this. The main source is in Tanya somewhere. There's a Haggah. The Alter Rebbe says, the Yetzirah Dikdusha, the Bria Dikdusha. It's like, in other words, there's in this world the spiritual world of action, and within it is the spiritual world of formation. So that's one thing I noticed. And maybe it's obvious. I was speaking to one of my mentors recently, and he was saying, you don't necessarily have to stress that so much, that they're all here and not necessarily away. And I thought for a second, I'm like, really? Why not? Isn't the other, comprehension of it that they're, let's say if somebody understands Atzilus is some spiritual idea far and high, and then there's Bria, and then finally there's us.
Right.
Wouldn't that be Tzimtzum Kipshutai, right? That the way God created the world, he contracted himself, removed himself, and he's not here, and then created a spiritual realm, and then eventually from that another. In other words, removing the spirituality from the physicality as much as possible. Wouldn't that be the same thing?
Yeah.
It was a quick conversation, so I didn't really necessarily get an answer. But now, what did you think? That was probably something pretty obvious to you.
Sure.
In your study of Kabbalah and Chassidus throughout the years, that it's all here.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I think that there is something of a quantum leap or a seismic shift that happens in the journey of studying Chassidut and Kabbalah as a young man within the structures and frameworks and communities that we were raised in.
Right.
Where it goes, at least this happened for me, and I'm curious if it's the same for you, where it goes from being a system which is very complex, very detailed, very ornate, but very removed, very distant from our lived realities. And at some point, somehow, and I'm curious how this happened for you, there's a shift where we realize that all of those things that we're talking about out there somewhere are actually right here, right? They're inside of us, inside of this reality that we're living. And I think that shift is a big one, an important one. And I don't know, it's challenging because the texts often do speak about these realms and worlds as if they're distant from us and as if they're planes away from us. But I think if you sit down with any mature teacher of Chassidus, they'll tell you that, no, of course these things are here, right?
Yeah, he was agreeing with that point. He was just saying, like, who said, like, when you're teaching these concepts to somebody who's never heard of them before, is that, the first thing you need to stress.
Right.
Because I was stressing it early on, because I felt this was like a certain novelty, I guess.
I hope you'll excuse me and you let me ask questions too. I know that.
Sure. We'll talk.
Okay, good. I'm curious how that shift happened for you. At what point did you realize that the worlds that we speak about in these levels are not out there somewhere, but are here? What precipitated that for you?
I don't know. I don't remember the exact moment. I just do remember that the whole cosmic evolution of spiritual realms, the Hishtalshelus, never really spoke to me in my earlier years, like to 18, 19. I didn't really understand what the necessity of it for,
Right.
why are we learning about these weird details of things coming from things, like what is it all about? I didn't understand. What did talk to me in the Kabbalah and the Chassidus is the constant creation.
Right.
In other words, the fact, like, it was like an astonishing fact to me and discovery, and it made so much sense and just resonated so, like such a click. This world is physical, so it needs to be coming from somewhere, and it's something new, which was never here before, and therefore it's being created every moment. In other words, there's this, it's not what we see here. There's more spiritual power and energy in it. That was something which really spoke to me. That was like the first idea in Kabbalah, which spoke to me, which caught my attention, and I really thought about it for a long time, and it really inspired me. I lived with it. It was like a fascinating idea. Like, wow, the power in that idea is just, there's an infinite God. There's an infinite reality, which is perfect and singular, and you're part of it, and everything is just subservient to that greatness. So there's all this bad in the world, or seemingly bad, and they seem to be like powers which you should be scared of. But then when you hear this idea that no, there's this infinite energy which is energizing us and putting us into reality, and without it we wouldn't exist. That's what we are. That was just powerful. That's inspirational. Like, wow, meaningful. So that spoke to me for quite a while, but I wasn't understanding all this Atzilus. Like, what is this all about?
Do you remember how old you were when that penny dropped for you?
When I started.
Yeah, when that became a real experiential.
The creation or the Atzilus?
The creation aspect.
It was in Shir Gimel Masifta. It's the last year of, I guess, the equivalent of high school. We learned the Maimer of Ha'omnam. It's the Hasidic discourse from about 100 years ago, where he discusses this concept of constant creation and how, he asks the question, if really the entire universe would disappear, then aren't we an imagination? And all this, like, it just all resonated. It was all like, wow, this is like, this means something. Like,
Totally.
It was almost like, filling in the gaps. It's
Totally.
the questions that I had, but like never really thought about. But definitely when I got into Kabbalah, I was like, well, this is what it's thinking about.
Yeah.
And there is a whole discussion that many, it's probably part of the reason why Kabbalah was secret for many generations, and why there are still many factions who say, hey, don't study Kabbalah, because it does create questions, which really, make you think about reality, and not everybody can handle that.
Yeah, certainly.
So back to third year of Masifta, high school. So there was that Maimer of Homnam that was just really resonated with me, and then there was Viadaita, which was also how everything, which the whole physicality, everything which we see which seems bad, and that there's a deep meaning within it and just concealed. We can't see it with our physical eyes. So yeah, that's where that happened. But it was only till good 2-3 years later, 19 Shir Daled, last year of the yeshiva system, where it was just a very good mentor, and he just was very organized, and he explained Hishtalshelus, and it was very organized, and I remember, like, in his first 2 or 3 classes, I just started appreciating Hishtalshelus. He explained the difference between Ratzon, will, and Midos, feelings, which I've always thought, what is the difference between your feelings and your will? Isn't that what you want? Your feelings are, according to Kabbalah, love and fear. Love is definitely very associated with wills. So he just defined the difference very well, and that's when I really started appreciating it. And then I noticed that the levels of our psyche are correspondent to the 4 worlds, and those 4 worlds are corresponding to the higher realms, and just everything started, falling into place. And so that was my journey.
It's nice when it all comes together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about you?
I think to your point as well that in some ways the whole chiddush, the whole novelty, the whole contribution of Chassidus was to say that all of these realms that Kabbalah speaks about, up there, out there, somewhere in the Godhead,
Right.
as academics might refer to it,
Mm-hmm.
is within the person, is within Nefesh Adam, is within
Right.
the individual, right? The individual created in the image of God, in the
Right.
image of the cosmos.
Right.
Chassidus, one could say, is coming to say, B'didi have uvda, that all this great cosmology is about me. It's about the individual. So in some ways to say that Atzilus, Bria, Yetzirah is all in here is really the message, or one of the key messages of the entire Hasidic revolution,
Yeah.
vis-a-vis the history of Kabbalah. So I think not only is it true, at least from the perspective of Chassidus, I think it's true and important to talk about and teach about. Right?
Yeah, definitely.
This is as Chassidim, we're held by the mantle of the Baal Shem Tov,
Right.
who famously writes in a letter to his brother-in-law that he meets Mashiach, and the Messiah tells him, he asks Mashiach, Emosai Kasimar, the famous question
Right.
Mashiach is asked throughout the generations, when is the Master coming? And Mashiach, we all know, answers, when your well springs,
Right.
when your teachings are spread to the whole world. So certainly, I think the job of teaching that all of these magnificent cosmological and theological speculations are all interior to us. They are our experience. I mean, one of the most repeated lines throughout Hasidic texts must be a line from the book of Job, Sefer Yov, that by looking into my own physicality, into my own flesh, into my own body, my own psyche,
Right.
I can see the divine. So to me, that's central to our mandate as
Right.
Chassidim.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a few verses. I was looking this up recently. So there's Mibsari Achzelika, right?
Mhm.
How do you translate that?
That from within my own flesh, I can perceive the divine, I would say.
Right. And then there is Adam,
Mhm.
Mishem Adam ala Elyon.
Yeah, yeah.
So I looked it up and it was really funny. The pasuk, the verse, Adam ala Elyon. I can't remember really already where it was, but it's basically the prophet is speaking down at Nebuchadnezzar, who said, he was so powerful, like speaking down at him after his downfall, like how he spoke about himself as so powerful to the extent that he called himself Adam ala Elyon, similar to above. And it's very interesting how, we take that, and it's very interesting how, the Kabbalah tells us that about the good and everything, and it brings out the spark of holiness, and we take this seemingly very lowly and very haughty, very selfish view of a person, that I'm similar to above, and we take it and we say, well, yeah, we are in a certain way similar to above. And then, but most of the sources that I found were actually referring, when they say Adam Mishem Adam ala Elyon, referring to Atzilus, the first of the relatable spiritual cosmic realms. But but there is a source which refers to just a person.
Right.
I was looking this up recently, but there was another one. What was it? There was a few verses about how we can learn from ourselves, from within us,
Certainly.
godliness.
Certainly. Yeah, I think there's many to that effect. It's interesting, and I've felt this to be the case for a while, that the most profound heresies are often not far from the most profound truths. And you see that there's this kind of this Ouroboros effect where the furthest reaches of falsehood are actually closest to the closest truths.
12 is closest to the 1.
Precisely, yeah. And the Kabbalists would say, no, it's tchilas and basayfim, that the edge is wedged in the beginning. That the very far end is not so far from the beginning.
Yeah.
For me, I grew up similarly learning Chassidus from a very young age. Where I assume the two of us both studied our bar mitzvah mimers in Yiddish and Hebrew.
I had no clue what I was talking about at that time.
Without knowing at all what we were talking about, but we learned how to regurgitate.
Which word pops out in your mind when you think of that mimer?
I do still think of the mimer. I was thinking just the other day of that beautiful, beautiful concept that the mimer brings from the Medrash. That tefillin d'mari alma maksiv b'ho.
Okay, it seems like you learned it. But the word, when you said the bar mitzvah mimer, what popped into my mind was aspaklaria ha'meira.
Certainly, we had no idea what that meant as 12-year-olds.
Just this word. I never really revisited that mimer. Maybe I should.
Yeah, I think it's worth revisiting. But there's something about throwing a 12-year-old child into the depths
Right.
of rabbinic, midrashic, Kabbalistic, Lurianic, Hasidic